Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat. We have a
This is so
We
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
As the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Wow, where did that video
What
come from?
was that?
That was some good production quality. I was impressed.
Wow, apparently that was the In the Clouds. Are we using the wrong brand here? What's happening? Anyways, so hello to our audience. Hopefully everybody is not confused. This is not In the Clouds with Mr. Stu Miniman. This is Ask an OpenShift Admin. So hello and welcome, everyone. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my amazing co-host, Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you today, sir?
I'm hanging in there. It's a cold day in Texas, so I'm trying to stay warm.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, and we were on the wrong brand, by the way. I'm so used to being in a flow of like checking to make sure the video clips tab here that says like, is it the intro video? I didn't even notice that it said ITC in the clouds instead of AOSA, Ask an OpenShift Admin. So there you go. That was my fault for not paying attention. Yeah, I it is surprisingly warm here in the Raleigh area. I want to say it's in like the 60s at the moment, but my amazing girlfriend sent me a text this morning and said, "Did you know that there's a bomb cyclone forming?" Like, one, that sounds really awful, but two, that
Yes.
mostly affects the Northeast apparently. So all of our friends and loved ones that are up in the Northeast, apparently they're preparing for a pretty nasty storm. So.
For what it's worth, I was in the Bay Area actually 2 weeks ago, and there was a bomb cyclone there, which I'd never heard of. And I was expecting, significant rain and wind. It just kind of drizzled for like 3-4 days. So
the Bay Area is
Typical.
so I've lived in the East and South most of my life, right? I've lived in other places as well, but I was in the Bay Area. This has been like 4 or 5 years ago, and I flew in and I got a rental car and I was driving from San Francisco down to San Jose, and I'm listening to the radio and they're talking about like record-setting rain, 1.1 inches in 24 hours. I'm like, 1.1 inches, like here in Raleigh, that's like a 20-minute afternoon storm.
yeah, definitely a different animal for sure. I feel like it's
Yeah.
it's kind of the Seattle rain versus the
Yeah.
Southeast. Right? I'm in Atlanta, so yeah, I'm definitely no stranger to the torrential downpours, especially in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're in Atlanta, then you've also had the same couple of hurricanes come through this year that we had here in the Raleigh area and got multiple
Mhm.
inches of rain. So
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. We had some flooding and whatnot. So, and also, while I remember it, obviously thoughts with our friends in Asheville. I know that they're still on the road to recovery. So
yeah, I have family up in that area,
Mhm.
including a brother-in-law who works at the quartz mine that's there. I don't know if you're familiar with that whole thing. So Spruce Pine area has like the largest quartz mine in the world that's in the most pure quartz that's used for a lot of semiconductor manufacturing. So I knew that he worked at the mine. I did not know that that's what it was used for until till that event happened. So, but yes, very much so. I know there are tons of relief efforts. Plus one to Red Hat on that, by the way. Internal for any Red Hatters who are watching, the organization at Red Hat around supporting folks out in Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, right, Georgia, South Carolina, et cetera, has been amazing. So, but
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah. Anyways, so I see chat is chatting. So thank you everybody for joining us today. So I'm gonna go through. I don't know. Do we have anything top of mind, Johnny?
Just schedule.
Okay. So we can kind of quickly touch on the schedule and all of that other stuff. I'll look at the chat while Johnny tells us about the schedule to see if there's any questions we can answer, and then I really want to get into today's topic. So I'll say in preparation a little bit of background. So Kasten is a company I've been familiar with. I think I met with y'all like 5 or 6 years ago, like before the Veeam acquisition. And so I've kind of had awareness of everything that Kasten is doing, and I've seen a lot of stuff around OpenShift virtualization with Kasten and all that other stuff, but I haven't seen it in years. So I'm really excited, and I'm hopeful, and I have no doubt that I will learn lots of new things today. And this is going to be a good one. So thank you for joining us, Matt. I guess I should let you introduce yourself, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Sully. So I'm wearing my Red Hat gear, some swag here. So very, very
Nice.
proud. Also, I will say too, I tell a number of Red Hatters this, I'm definitely a fanboy. I think I first installed Red Hat Linux when I was in, I want to say 6th grade. So you're going to give my age away here, but it was in 99, I think. So I remember having 3 or 4 installation disks. Jonny, I see the shake.
Monster.
But yes, I remember trying to ask a friend's dad who worked in IT, what's chmod? And then I learned, chmod, and changing our permissions.
Yeah.
Yes. I digress. My name is Matt Slotten. I'm a principal solution architect here at Veeam Kasten. My primary focus is on technical partnerships. I work very closely with Red Hat. In fact, Red Hat's pretty much my top 2 of all the partners I work with. And I do cover essentially all the partners that Kasten kind of works with. So there's a number of Red Hatters. I think I saw Michael St. John in the chat. So he and I are basically attached at the hip. So
Yeah, I've known Michael for a number of years now, and he's great to work with. So I'm very happy that you all are working together.
For sure. Yeah, he's a great guy. Good musical taste.
Yeah.
Good food taste as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
All right.
So I can kick off, or sorry, Sully, it's your show, so you tell me.
Yeah. So I'll let Jonny review the schedule real quick. I'm gonna look at chat. I see Hassan is asking some questions about OpenShift basics, so we'll spend a couple of minutes on that and then get started.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so just coming up, we have next week, which we're going to have Turbonomics on from IBM. And so that's going to be a pretty cool episode. We met Eva at KubeCon as well. So she and another engineer from that team are going to come on, and they're going to talk about that and all the awesome stuff that Turbonomics is doing. And that's another fist bump. And, shout out to Peter Lauterbach for, making these connections, and also Michael St. Jean for making the connections at KubeCon. And then we have the Christmas break, and then Red Hat has the break between Christmas and New Year. So we'll be back on the 8th. I don't think we have a topic locked in yet, but I think we have a couple that are kind of stewing on the back burner to see if we can't get them in. But yeah, so just know we'll be out after next week. We'll be out for at least 2 weeks, and then we'll be back on the 8th. And then for today, Matt, we were talking in the pre-show where we were at KubeCon and talking to Peter Lauterbach and Michael St. John, and they were like, hey, we've got Veeam here, and we've been working with Matt Bader, with my team specifically, because he was doing a brief over at OpenShift Commons on some of the work that he was doing with Kasten and the validated patterns and stuff like that. So it was really cool to meet Matt. I saw his picture with the mustache, and I was like, I wonder if the mustache is actually like that pronounced. And it is the dopest mustache you will ever see. Like it is a full-fledged, it's a thing.
And to be clear, I know, Jonny, you said Matt Bader. Just to be clear, obviously, my name is Matt as well. I am non-mustached Matt. So
yes.
I'm sometimes referred to as such. I wish I had that sort of mouth accessories. I just can't. And also, sorry, age-wise, it occurred to me I was in 6th grade in '97, so that ages me a little bit more.
That didn't help, dude. That was
right. Yeah. So I still can't grow a mustache, so I couldn't then, and I can't now. So.
I feel like you need to show up to a meeting with like a fake mustache sometime.
Yeah, I scribble it on.
We've actually, we've bought some fake mustaches expressly for this purpose. So I think come next November, we might have some fun with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's really it is really a thing. And to me, I think the way that to be able to talk and present and not have it because to me, even this right here, I'm always like, so for him to just be as casual about it as he is, I think it's awesome. And it's a good look. So anyways, it's impressive. It's
last thing I say, the real hero in this story is Matt's wife, because she obviously, it's not just for presentation. She has to put up with it day in and day out.
Does she actually comb it every morning for him?
I think she waxes it for him. Yeah. Does
makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, he's got to look presentable. They can't let him leave the house like that. So.
Exactly. November. Always some interesting, I'll say, stories and photos that come out of November.
Yes. Yeah.
where was I feel very discombobulated today. Opening with the whole in the clouds video just completely threw me off on this particular one. So my apologies for being very scatterbrained.
It was a little weird,
Anyway,
yeah.
going back to chat. So Hassan was asking about OpenShift basics. So the quick breakdown is OpenShift is Red Hat's opinionated Kubernetes distribution. So what that means is, right, anybody can go upstream, can get and deploy Kubernetes onto whatever Linux they so choose. With OpenShift, what you're doing is getting Red Hat, and I use the term opinionated, our opinionated Kubernetes distribution, because it is built on top of Red Hat Enterprise Core Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux Core OS. Wow, I jumbled those words up. Also affectionately known as ARCOS. Which is our variant or our specific operating system that is optimized for containers and Kubernetes. You get the normal downstream value of Red Hat subscription associated with not just that base underlying Linux, but also Kubernetes components, so kubelet, etc. And then all of the things that you need in addition to just Kubernetes to make it into a production application platform. So think things like SDN and storage integration, a bunch of different operators for things like service mesh and pipelines and GitOps and all of that other stuff that all come with OpenShift. And then, of course, at the end of the day, all of it is tested, validated, and supported as a cohesive unit. So if you're using OpenShift and the components in OpenShift, you can pick up the phone and give us a call, and we'll help you with that. At the same time, if you say, you know what, was it last week, Johnny, or 2 weeks ago, we had the Tigera folks on, right? I don't want to use Red Hat's SDN. I don't want to use OVN Kubernetes. I want to use Tigera Calico. You can absolutely do that, and it's still jointly supported by both of our companies. So, and likewise, OpenShift doesn't have any backup capabilities. I keep telling people this, right? I guess it sort of does with OADP, sort of. But there is no intrinsic or built-in backup or disaster recovery capability, right? In Kubernetes, much like an OpenShift as an extension of, basically treats the clusters as ephemeral, right? The cluster itself is disposable. What we really care about is the workload inside of it. And so, I know Johnny and I both kind of regularly internally answer questions from folks of like, how do I recover my cluster, right? Hey, can I, I'm deployed onto VMware. Can I just take a snapshot, or can I use SRM or something like that? And the answer to that is really probably not, because the cluster and the workload are decoupled from each other. And so if you just restore the cluster, does that mean that the workload is safe? Does that mean that the workload has been recovered, right? And even further, the workload, the applications, and the persistent data are also decoupled from each other in many ways inside of the cluster. Again, it's a Kubernetes thing, not an OpenShift thing. So really what we want to focus on is application protection and recovery. And I think that's a really important topic. I know that's something that Matt's going to be talking about and showing today is how, is it Kasten by Veeam? Is that the actual name?
We've rebranded as okay. Anyone is apt to do. So we are now officially Veeam Kasten.
Okay.
Veeam Kasten. Okay.
I've been seeing that kind of since the acquisition, and I wasn't sure because for a while it was Kasten K10 by Veeam, and
then
now
Kasten by Veeam, then Veeam Kasten. Yeah, there's just and then color changes as well. So yes, you would see me decked out in blue this time last year.
Yeah, now it's more green.
Now it's more green. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it complements red well. So
yeah, yes, it does,
and it's also very seasonal, at least here in the U.S.
For sure.
But that's a whole nother tangent. So, Hassan, I hope that answered your question in a roundabout way, and I somehow managed to tie that into today's topic. I don't know if I'm impressed or saddened by that. Really putting the marketing part of my title to work there. So with that, go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. Like just as a resource, Hassan, if you make sure that you sign up for your free developer account on developers.redhat.com, like the amount of resources that you get just from that free account, like it's you can't put a price on it, right? You really can't. You just get access to a number of resources, be it subscriptions, be it content, be it blogs, everything, right? Like there's so much that you get just from getting that free account. And so if you're really trying to kick the tires on OpenShift or on other Red Hat products and stuff like that, like you cannot beat it, right? That's pretty much the only way to go. So that's it. I just want to make sure we got that out.
That's a good point. Developer entitlement includes free OpenShift entitlements. So you can deploy up to 16 nodes of OpenShift using your developer entitlement. It's self-supported, but completely, you can absolutely use it. You just have to renew the developer account every 365 days.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's my thing. So I will hand off to Jonny and Matt for today's topic, and I'm gonna play the role I was born to play, which is ask dumb questions.
I love it.
Yes, me too. Me too. Yeah, Matt, thank you for coming on, man. Like, I really appreciate it. It was awesome meeting you in person. And I'm glad that we were able to make this happen. I know like there was we had a couple dates and then we're trying to line up and get the stars aligned for you to come on. So I'm really glad that it worked out. So I will shut up and kick it over to you and let you do your thing.
Awesome. No, likewise. Yeah, thank you for the invite. And yeah, likewise, Jonny, it was great meeting you in person. Hopefully next time we'll get some beers involved, but we'll figure that out. But yes, thank you guys for having me. And Sully, you could not have done a better job of setting me up, just talking about data protection, those fundamentals there around, why do we even talk about data protection with Kubernetes, or in this case, obviously OpenShift. So with that, I'll give a quick intro and then we'll just kind of, talk through a little bit. I've got a demo I'd like to show. I do have slides, but I will try to avoid using those because I think we all see enough slides in our lives. So with that, just a high-level overview for those unfamiliar with Veeam. So Veeam is a leader in all things data protection. We are a software-only company, so we don't create storage, we don't sell storage, and we don't create products to sell storage. So kind of an important differentiator relative to some of our competing products relative to Kasten or Veeam Data Platform or Veeam Data Cloud. So I focus, like I said, I focus specifically on Kasten, which is our backup product for Kubernetes. And Sully, you hit the nail on the head in terms of, especially when you're transitioning from I call it traditional infrastructure or traditional virtualization infrastructure to containerized applications and cloud native applications. Not everything always is a one-to-one when it comes to things like data protection or even monitoring or observability. The world has changed a little bit because of the differences in architecture. And I come from a virtualization background. In fact, if you'd asked me probably 6 years ago, like what I knew about Kubernetes, it'd be next to nothing, and I thought it was a bad word. So how things have changed. I've seen the light. I've seen the beauty of what Kubernetes can do.
I wish I could say the same. The first time I deployed Kubernetes was pre 1.0, back when you had to compile SkyDNS and then deploy it into. Yeah, it was way back when.
Man, yeah, you got in early. I was, for the longest time, again, I came from VMs were good enough, right? I was happy with VMs. And then finally, I think I was kind of forced into it at a previous company. They're a Red Hat partner. I previously worked for Nutanix. We actually built our test drive all in Kubernetes. So I got to learn quickly. And, there's some nuance.
Trial by fire.
Trial by fire. One of my biggest complaints still is actually log monitoring and observability, but there obviously are plenty of solutions around that. Obviously ACS and ACM being great complements for that. But yeah, like I said, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to data protection for Kubernetes. Unlike VM infrastructure, where maybe traditionally we could take a snapshot or maybe a snapshot with a little bit of application awareness, Kubernetes is a little bit different because there's this decoupled architecture, right? We actually decouple our applications from the infrastructure. And obviously that's by design, right? It gives us a number of benefits, right? Portability, scalability. And we can talk about portability a little bit because it's not as easy necessarily as just moving a container from A to B, unfortunately. But there are ways that we can make that much easier. And then obviously running OpenShift on multiple clouds, that will certainly save some headache and some tears. And then obviously Kasten can complement that. So I think there was a question around ARO and ROSA. So I'll definitely touch upon those here in a minute. But yeah, actually, it's a common thing we see with our customers that, when we approach them and say, hey, are you guys running Kubernetes today? And they say, yes. We say, oh, okay, well, how are you protecting the applications and data? And a lot of the time we actually are told, like, we don't worry about that. That's not our problem. Or we're snapshotting the worker nodes. And, it's kind of, it's a good opportunity to kind of come in and, gently say, I hear you. That's probably not a great approach. Have you tried restoring? And then we typically kind of go down that path, and the answer is typically no. Occasionally you'll get customers that like to back up etcd, which Yeah, it can work.
Yeah. I'm reminded of probably 20 years ago. I was a junior administrator and I was working, just learning storage and all that. And somebody reminded me that backups are worthless and restores are priceless.
It's
Right.
absolutely. So I'll pick on in a previous life, I was a consultant for a large global system integrator, and I worked for about 2 years for a large bank, actually in Australia. And when I was there, ancillary to my project, this is when I was still a virtualization engineer. There was a big outage. They had lost some data in one of their core banking databases. And I remember being in the data center and seeing they had the old fashioned tape robot that had a little arm that, would
I had a bunch of those under my purview back in the day.
they're pretty cool. Even today, like, it's anything that's mechanical. I'm a, bit of, obviously you can tell I'm a bit of a nerd, and I like to play with electronics and motors and whatnot. And yeah, I always found it really cool that they had this physical thing that was moving tape. But when I was there, I remember, there was a big buzz, we need to restore this data. No problem. We'll grab the most recent tape. They put it in, went to go restore, couldn't read it. Yeah. So then they sent the truck out because they, did the right thing and stored those backups off site in a different location, pulled the truck, and they had a whole plethora of tapes. They actually went back almost 2.5 years. There was a change in the file system that essentially made their backups unreadable. So it was a big data loss event. So to underscore your point, Sully, very important that you can recover and you test your recoverability, because otherwise it's all just worthless.
Yeah, there's a great, if anybody remembers the website Daily WTF, Worse Than Failure, there's a great one from, I want to say it's literally like 2006 or something. And it's called, I still remember to this day, it's a backup. And it's a story about a guy who they were like creating hundreds of backups within a week's time frame, but like weren't actually protecting anything. And it's just one of those reminders of, for me back when I was in, early admin days of like, restores are priceless. Like, doesn't matter how much you're backing up, restores are what's important.
And I think as humans, we're often, it's like you got to tick the box. The question is, are you performing backups? And we often say yes, we are. But to your point, what are you backing up? And really the question is, are you able to restore?
Does it work?
Yes, yeah, in the event of emergency. So yeah, that's a very common conversation we have our customers. We talk about etcd. And the question becomes, can you recover from etcd? So, for my VM admins on the call, or anyone interested, is, if you etcd is the underlying kind of configuration database under Kubernetes. So it manages things, it keeps track of things like state, where containers are on which nodes, how many, all of that. So it sounds like it would be a good thing to protect. But remember, as Sully mentioned, Kubernetes is meant to be ephemeral, right? The platform itself is meant to be ephemeral. So if you try to take that etcd database and just do an in-place restore or even restore elsewhere, things change pretty frequently in cloud native architectures, right? We can dynamically provision or scale up or scale down pods. We can provision new worker nodes and deprovision them. So, there's a good chance that if you try to just take a snapshot of your etcd database and restore it, things aren't going to come up in a clean way.
And interestingly enough, way back in episode 96, we tried to do that. Mm-hmm. Jonny and I spent, 2 or 3 hours basically trying to do exactly that. And because the thought process is exactly what you described. People think, oh, I'm backing up my etcd database. Worst case scenario is I create a new cluster and then I just restore the old etcd on top of it. And the problem is Kubernetes, and OpenShift by extension, stores all of the configuration data for the cluster inside of there, including things like certificates. Mm-hmm. So I have this new cluster and it was stood up and it's using certificates for the new cluster to communicate between the nodes. And then I restore the old etcd on top of it and it says, I don't know any of these nodes. I don't know who they are. I can't talk with them. I don't trust them. And things just fall apart. Mm-hmm. And yes, with enough determination and time, you can absolutely recover from that by going in and forcing, certificate acceptance and rotation and all that other stuff. But at that point, you're taking longer than if you just restore the workload back to the cluster itself. Mm-hmm. And, that's where it becomes the, what I was saying before and which you reinforced is the cluster doesn't matter. The cluster is disposable. What we care about is the workload.
Exactly. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm glad you guys try to do that. I have actually yet to try. I think I've tried. I say that I've tried it once, and I think I spent not 3 to 4 hours. I spent 30 minutes just to see what would happen. And yeah, I think as soon as I tried to the actual restore, nothing was communicating. I was like, this is a futile exercise.
It was glorious. It was just it was glorious.
So were you able to actually get it back up after the? Okay, yeah.
We could never get it fully functional, and it was entirely. Again, I think we probably could have with enough determination, but we kept encountering certificate errors, and then it was like this configuration, this node doesn't have this precise configuration because like MAC address has changed and therefore IP's changed. And then you got to go in and, okay, now it recognizes a node, but I have to reconfigure all the services to point at the new location. And yeah, it just became.
Yeah. The restore will actually work, but the actual services coming back to the cluster never came back to full.
Yeah.
And light, so
great illustration of the point too, because I'm sure previous admins ourselves, we've all been there where you've pushed some bad code, accidentally deleted something. So think about trying to do that and then being in the hot seat. Right?
I have never accidentally deleted the wrong data store in my vSphere environment. that has not happened more than once, I promise.
Ever.
At the risk of a tangent. Yeah, I was briefly a VDI administrator engineer back when, well, not that VDI is dead, but back when it was really, really exciting. And we were actually using it for a project where our developers were all using virtual desktops. And one of our core developers, I was new to the project. I was a relatively junior sysadmin, and I deleted his persistent virtual desktop, which had all of his unchecked in code. And that was not a fun conversation to go up to. And we weren't running backups. We weren't using Veeam or anything like that. So I had to go and say, hey, how important was that?
on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah. I take a step back. Yeah. So we ended up, actually, I take that back. We were able to get his code back, thank goodness, because he did use a network share. So there was the happy end of that story. So
yeah.
But yeah, so I think I've belabored it, but yeah, long story short, Kubernetes is a little bit different, or a lot bit different than maybe physical infrastructure or virtual infrastructure. So that's typical kind of objections we get initially. But then the next question comes, and we still get this today, is the cluster is all ephemeral anyways. There's nothing to protect. And I always kind of say yes, if and it's half joking, depending on the customer, but like if it was 2016. Yeah, I would agree with you. It is all ephemeral. Everything, all of your persistence and data is probably in a database off the cluster. But Kubernetes introduced this great thing called persistent volumes and persistent volume claims that lets us have these persistent data and these persistent workloads in the cluster, and for good reason. Like we've a number of reasons, right? So you think about just in terms of performance. I'm not having to go out to a third party, let's see, a public cloud provider for a database, or even if it's in my environment, having to go outside the cluster and grab it. If my data is right there, my container can basically just access that. Also, other things like copy data management, right? We have this beautiful thing in OpenShift and in Kubernetes. So Kubernetes namespace, OpenShift projects, where maybe I want to take a copy of my production data and test it with some new code. It's really easy to do when everything's in the cluster and we've got PVCs plumbed. A little bit harder if we've got our database outside the cluster and doing some funky things with that. And the last thing, I'll say is about that is polyglot persistence. I like to say that because it's just a fun word to say, but also by polyglot persistence, a fancy way to say, look, multiple databases within the same application, right? So maybe I'm using Mongo for maybe user data, but then there's an order system. Let's say it's an e-commerce site that I'm actually tracking orders and having that relational database in Postgres. And that's much easier to do when we have our persistent data all in the cluster. And then, big surprise when it comes to actually protecting this, Kasten can protect it either way, right? So whether the data, let's say your cluster is completely, there is no persistent data and it's all living outside. We do have things like application awareness where we can actually run SQL dumps or log dumps. And we also protect the metadata. So really important there in terms of restorability. Back to that point is, in the hot seat, when you want to restore, do you want to have to go over to Postgres and do a manual restore there and then make sure your containers come up and then network? The nice thing about Kasten is we can automate all of that for you, and you can ensure that not only will you restore and get your data back, the application will actually start and you've got your containers up and humming. So,
yeah. And so I'll pause you there. I think there was a question, Jonny. I saw you acknowledge somebody's question.
Yeah, so we've got a couple. One was about it was more about like getting started with OpenShift, but the one that it came from Waleed about Kasten's role in DR between managed OpenShift services like ARO, Rosa, GCP OSD, back and forth.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, love to cover this too because this is a key benefit of both Red Hat OpenShift and Kasten. Is in the case of managed OpenShift, if you've got ROSA and RO or some other, whatever cloud you choose, as I mentioned previously, it's not always as easy as just taking a container image and, just moving it from cloud to cloud, right? So Kubernetes, to take a step back, Docker is not Kubernetes, and Kubernetes uses Docker, or sometimes uses Docker depending on the runtime. In the case of OpenShift, I believe the answer is no, because you guys have your own runtime. But yeah, I think oftentimes that's another thing, for people just starting out is like, how do I back up my Docker containers? That there's a good argument against backing up Docker containers specifically, because typically it's just a container you can pull back down, right? So, you don't want to write persistent things into your Docker container, because if it restarts, that is gone. And there is some caveats there. Obviously, you can do volumes in Docker and whatnot. But really, the beauty of Kubernetes is we have this orchestration where it will use our Docker images, but also, essentially define the application so we can have things like services and ingresses. And we can have persistent data and have that all mapped. And Kubernetes kind of handles that all for us. So long story short, though, if we want to move from something like RO to ROSA or vice versa, there's going to be some differences, right? Even though it's OpenShift on both sides, storage is a key component there, right? So obviously in ROSA, we can have things like EBS, we can have things like FSX, was it Amazon FSX for NetApp? You can have EFS, whereas maybe on the RO side, we're using was it Azure Container Storage is their new offering. So if you just try to take everything from RO and just plop it into ROSA, you're going to have a hard time starting those applications, right? Because storage classes don't exist. Maybe like networking's different, right? Routes, I guess routes are probably pretty consistent within OpenShift, but you get the idea. We need to make some changes as we're migrating or performing this DR. And the beauty of Kasten is we can do that kind of in flight. So when you actually perform a restore, we have these things called transform engines, where you can essentially, for lack of a better term, you can think of it almost like regex, where it's like as it's being restored, it's scalable regex that you don't actually have to remember, because I have to relearn regex every time I use it. But we can essentially look at the metadata and try to find. You can change the storage class. You can bump up the number of replicas or bump it down. Basically, anything that's in the YAML, the underlying YAML. And sorry, I should also back up for those new. YAML is a common, it's yet another markup language. It's a common markup language we use for Kubernetes and defining applications. And the good news is it's all text, so we can actually modify these things. The closest equivalent in VMware would be like, was it the VMX files or the, might be just the VMDK, where you define, this VM has X CPU, X memory. Kind of the same in Kubernetes, but a little bit different. But long story short, we can change that as you're moving. So again, a lot of good benefits here in terms of backup restore and disaster recovery. Let's say an availability zone goes down, or you just want to get everything off of one cloud provider to another. Kasten can be the conduit for that. And obviously, if you're using OpenShift, the beautiful thing is the interface, the user experience will be very much the same on both sides. Also worth mentioning, though, that using the same capability, we can actually take workloads that aren't in OpenShift today and move them into OpenShift using the same mechanism, using transforms. That was a word soup, but hopefully that helped.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Waleed, if you have any second level questions that you want to ask to what you just heard, let us know, and we'll make sure that Matt gets them. So no, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I saw some. I think there might have been a question. I keep having to scroll down because I'm talking to a very small monitor right now. It's a teleprompter. That's how I can look you guys in the eye in a creepy way. But I saw in the chat too, there were some questions about OpenShift Vert, which I'd love to talk about as well. That's something that we at Kasten are very excited about. A lot of our customers are excited about for obvious reasons, right? So I think probably a number of people watching this are probably watching this because they're considering moving off their traditional or legacy virtualization platform into something like OpenShift virtualization. So a couple things there from a migration perspective. I think that was the question specifically. So
they're doing a POC on that right now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I think from the Kasten side, if you're coming from non-OpenShift going to OpenShift, we recommend using Migration Toolkit for VMs. That's kind of the gold standard, right? You guys have done a fantastic job building that utility, and it's a good way to go from a live system to a live system. At the risk of getting ahead of myself, and our director of product management would slap my wrists, I will say we are working potentially, if you're an existing Veeam VBR customer, on enabling you to maybe restore some VM workloads into OpenShift via VBR, or a VBR equivalent / Kasten. I'll say it's on the roadmap. I won't commit to dates. I won't say when that's happening, but it's something we're aware of. Obviously, you want to be able to have that portability, that mobility.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, for migrating to OpenShift virtualization, MTV is the key. Once you're on OpenShift, Kasten can protect those VMs. So we can do that today, actually out of the box. I can essentially fully backup restore. We are diligently working. It's as you guys can imagine, it's a very new workload from a Kubernetes perspective, right? So I think the project's been around since 2016, something like that. But it's really caught at least the open source project has, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But it's really kind of gained traction again for obvious reasons in the past 12 to 24 months. And it just some things are different, right? So we often are dealing with more data. We're dealing with things like block mode PVCs. So that's an important thing that you want to consider when you're deploying OpenShift virtualization. You can deploy it with on top of file storage, but really the gold standard, if you can do it, depending on your storage, is to use block mode PVCs. And again, for my old school VMware guys, think of that almost like an RDM, but not the bad parts of RDMs, the good parts, where you can essentially mount a raw disk into your VM. And that way you don't have to go filter through file systems, right? Because, go ahead.
It's funny because, RDMs, like back in my day, one of the big reasons why folks wanted RDMs is because they needed disks that were larger than what, VMFS could support. And so I think there's still a lot of legacy RDMs as a result of that, but that doesn't apply with OpenShift virtualization, right? PVCs can be whatever arbitrary size. I say arbitrary. I think it's the maximum size is whatever the maximum, disk size is with RHEL, and it's multiple exabytes or something like that. So that was one of the big reasons. Aside from that, it was also SCSI 3 reservations. For folks who are doing like Windows Server failover clustering, stuff like that. That's supported with OpenShift virtualization. But yeah, I know there was a lot of, again, I'm going to say legacy reasons for RDMs. And anytime they come up now, I always encourage folks to evaluate why you're still using RDMs. Like, do you still need RDMs if you're changing the way that the storage works and the way it's connected and stuff like that? But anyways, sorry, tangent.
I think it's a great thing to mention or bring up, though, is and this is why we love OpenShift so much, from a product perspective. And again, my fanboy is somewhat showing here, but love that it's a container platform. But if, let's say, you don't have any containerized apps today, you just want to get VMs off of your current infrastructure, you can do that with OpenShift. And then essentially the platform's already there. So as you grow, maybe you start taking some of those applications and containerizing them, which obviously it's not a simple task. We know there's going to be a lot of talk with engineering, probably, depending on your organization, probably the business as well. But the beautiful thing about OpenShift and OpenShift virtualization and then Kasten is no matter if the application is comprised of all VMs, if the application is comprised of a mix of VMs and containers, or is all containers, OpenShift can host it and Kasten can protect it. So kind of worth noting there. But yeah. So I'm glad you brought up also. Yeah, let's look at the opportunities here as we migrate from an old platform and look at the new capabilities of Kubernetes, which again can be daunting. We know Kubernetes and OpenShift itself. It's kind of one of those things is like, how long is a piece of string? How deep do you want to go down the rabbit hole? For techie guys like ourselves, it can be very fun. Also, sometimes you end up in the weirdest Reddit threads of I'm seeing this error. But yeah, I guess long story short, there's a lot of opportunities there.
It's never a good sign when you search for a thing and you come up with one result and it's yourself the last time you encountered it or something like that. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I actually, it happened actually today for me, or last night. I'm a model train nerd. I'm a nerd of many ilks, but model trains is probably one of the top ones. And I actually am having an issue that I posted about like 2 years ago in a forum, and I'm still the only one apparently having this issue. So Anyways,
I think it was it XKCD with the Denver Coder 9, like, where they post a question into a forum and like there's no responses, but then they come back and say, I found the answer, and then that's it.
yes, no one replies.
How did you solve this? Yeah.
Can you share with the world? Yes, there is So, but yeah, so we talked about RDMs, we talked about, raw disks. Really important that we have read, write, many for that as well, right? So there's a number of storage offerings that support that, ODF being one of them, or OpenShift Data Foundations. And the reason why that's important is, I'll call it vMotion, but live migration, right? Is so the benefit, hopefully the benefit of having a block disk makes sense. Again, you can do file disk still in OpenShift, but you're then shooting through kind of Plinko, right? You've got your container, and then it's trying to talk to its disk, but in between you might have a file system, maybe NFS under that, and then your VM's file system. Every time you do that, from a performance perspective, from a capacity perspective, you're kind of zooming in or cutting some bits out just because of those layers. So by doing a block mode PVC, you can avoid that. And then by having read write many, that means you can live migrate from one worker node to another, or one host to another, if you want to call it that. So really important. And then the kind of icing on the top, how Kasten fits into all this. Right now, Kasten is one of the very few products that supports block mode exports. So we can actually export that data, those PVCs that are in block mode, off the cluster, right? Because snapshots aren't backup. I like to just to remind everyone, snapshots are great, love them, but it's not a backup, right? If you lose what the snapshot's on, you can't really restore. So very important to get that off the cluster.
Having previously worked for a storage company, yes, I cannot reinforce enough that snapshots are not backups, because they're in the same location as the primary data. If that storage array fails for whatever reason, the RAID group fails, the array falls through the floor, the site, goes up in smoke, it's not a backup. So yeah, I've had that fully inculcated into my brain over the half a decade that I worked there.
Yes, well, and for good reason. Again, I'm sure you had probably multiple customers that were treating snapshots like backup, and it gets ugly quickly. So really important that we can export these block mode disks off, but it also affords us some pretty cool capabilities when it comes to even file system mode disks as well. So think about things like something that's missing right now for general Kubernetes storage is change block tracking. So I think a lot of it's definitely an education element for us when we're talking to customers who maybe are backing up terabytes of data today, or even petabytes in VMs, and it's super quick. But then when you go to try to do it in Kubernetes with the same VMs, it may not be quite as quick because you don't have things like change block tracking built in. Go ahead, Sully. Sorry.
I was just going to use that to point out that this is one of those things where Red Hat wants OpenShift virtualization to be a good, I'll say, a tenant, actor, user of the Kubernetes platform. And so the solution to that, right, like you said, there is no change block tracking in PVCs. And so rather than trying to go around the process and implement it in some other way, we're working upstream within the CSI SIG in order to introduce that capability in Kubernetes, and then it'll come into OpenShift after the fact. So I know there's work that's being done around that, and I know that there are some storage vendors and even I think some backup vendors that support that in various ways. I don't know what those ways are. It's all black magic to me. Remember, I have both manager and marketing in my title, so therefore I no longer know what I'm talking about, but
know enough to sound dangerous. No, obviously, so you've got a lot of experience, but I mean, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of we're kind of where the industry is. I know, in fact, there's a Kubernetes enhancement. Was it KEP proposal? KEP, yeah,
yes,
that's where the P is in proposal. So that was, I think, that was merged in. The PR was merged in, I think, about 6 or 8 months ago. But that, to your point, so that's exactly what we're looking for. It's the standard for change block tracking in CSI. Is actually a number of our engineers were part of that. I think working hand in hand with some Red Hat engineers to introduce that KEP. I believe it's going to alpha in 1.3.2. I think is the last I heard, something like that.
When at OpenShift Commons, it came up like during like there's a couple of briefs that were kind of leading up to Matt's, and it came up a solid 3 or 4 times about just that specific change block tracking, where it was in the process and stuff like that. So it's important, right? And there's a lot of people talking about it, and there's a lot of people waiting on it to hit Kubernetes before they start like really taking some action on it. So
exactly. Cool. So, and so again, Sully teamed me up so well, and at the risk of being shelling out my product here, but Kasten, we do support change block tracking today, even if it's not in the CSI driver, for a number of kind of known entities. So one of them, Ceph RBD, which is essentially kind of ODF. It's not full change block tracking, but because we know the stack, we're able to do things in Ceph that we can't do with some other unknown storage. EBS, we support full change block tracking for it, and we actually just announced, and we just released 7.5 about a week ago. With our latest 7.5 release, we now support Azure Managed Disk as well for change block tracking. So it's definitely moving in that direction. And so, as you mentioned, I'm in a lot of talks actually with a number of large storage vendors and small that are looking to implement in their CSI driver, and that's going to be the key. But back to the file versus block, by doing block mode exports, we can actually export file system mode PVCs using block mode. And the question is, why would we want to do that if we have change block tracking? If we were trying to just export it in file system mode, we'd have to essentially fingerprint everything, all those files, every time we perform backup, right? So there's a read operation across saying which files are new. That's what I know I need to back up. By using change block tracking under that file system disk, we can essentially just say, hey, array, give us what bits have changed, and that's what we'll back up, and we can back that up using block mode. So really kind of an efficient way to do things. So it has repercussions beyond just VMs. Obviously, VMs kind of the first and foremost, but there's some benefits here for large file systems.
Oh, that's cool though.
Yeah, that was one of our engineers kind of came up with it in the data mover that Kasten uses. So it's a pretty clever way to approach it in terms of how we're doing that today with getting that. So but yes, look for more updates when it comes to Red Hat specifically. I know I think Peter Lauterbach, I saw him in the chat. We are in constant talks with him. I think I try not to harass him too much on Slack, but you just give him a how's it going, Peter? How's this coming? But yeah, so lots of good things coming down the pipe, and I want to be conscious of time too. You guys good if I jump into a quick demo, or are there questions?
Go for it. Yeah, this is your show.
Yeah, please do.
Cool. So all right, I'm going to show. I'm going to show one slide, get that over with, and then we'll jump into the demo. Because at the beginning, Sully, you brought up OADP, so I'll show a little quick slide about what is OADP, how does Kasten relate to it. Because it is an offering, right? So it's OpenShift API for data protection.
Yep.
Yeah. So under the covers, and let me share.
And I don't want to undermine or demean the work of the OADP team and the folks that they're doing there. It is a good and it's a valid tool for what it is good for, right? Which is it's effectively Velero underneath the covers, and you can absolutely do application protection with it, right? It takes the metadata associated with that particular application, so the YAML objects, etc., along with PVCs, and it extracts them from there. But there are some very definite limitations, right? You've got a far better slide here for illustrating this, so I don't need to belabor the point. But I definitely don't want to discredit or otherwise, infer that OADP and Velero by extension, or Velero and OADP by extension, are not, good for the things that they're good for.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, a lot of respect to the OADP team too. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, but you hit the nail on the head again. Sully, you're just knocking them out of the park here. Under the covers, it is Velero. So at end of day, it is an open source project. A number of other Kubernetes backup solutions, right? Leverage Velero under the covers, and it's in many cases it is good enough, right? So if I've got a test dev environment, if I'm not super concerned about security. If I don't care about a UI, if I only want, just to do this all via pipeline or directly via kubectl commands.
You may want to put this in presentation mode, Matt.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry.
And I don't know if y'all can hear it, but it's thundering here. So that's why I was just looking at the sky.
It's actually, I'm south of you. Obviously, I'm getting some gray out there too. A lot of wind.
I don't know what happened, but it's splitting the screen.
All right, let me. I might just leave it. There we go. All right, let's see if we can do this. There we go. Nothing like PowerPoint to throw us a curveball. But yeah, just a couple things to note. And again, I promise this is the only slide I'll show. Again, Velero might be good enough for some use cases, but for production or enterprise workloads or enterprise VMs, we probably want to start considering things like encryption that's not across the entire project, right? So technically, Velero does have encryption, but it is a common key across all repositories. So kind of the metaphor or allegory here is, if I have a lock on my door, but everyone in the world has a key, is it really locked? Is kind of the key there, pun intended. But also things like immutability, right? We talk about ransomware. I think there's a yearly study that Veeam runs. We just released our 2024 a couple months ago. But I think over 85%, if I get that number right, of organizations have experienced a ransomware attack in the last 12 months. And we actually think this might be a little bit lower because a lot of organizations may not know that they've been attacked because maybe they successfully defended and just didn't catch it. But this is where immutability becomes key, because really your backup and having an immutable backup is your last line of defense against something like ransomware. So again, kind of a key thing to keep in mind when you're looking at production workloads. Other than that, I guess, and we'll dive into the demo here too. Nice, friendly user interface. Going back to that, mentioning, I think we've all been there before in terms of being in the hot seat, trying to get something back online. Do you want to have to be going, digging through some scripts you've written, or trying to do some quick git commits and run GitHub actions, or do you want to just want to go to an interface, say restore, and be able to kind of get the nice, friendly green check mark that all our project managers and business like to see? That's something that Kasten can absolutely do. So let me head over. I'm going to pull open this. Hopefully this comes up. Oh, I might have to reshare. This is getting funny with the sharing. Let's see. Share screen. Why is this not? Okay, let me try this again. Or Jonny, is there any way you can kill my sharing session so I can?
Yep. Hang on just a second.
Okay. There we go. All right. It was just, I was clicking it. Nothing was coming up here. So let me try window again. We will do this. I'll move you over here. Oh no. Give me 1 second, guys. I've got my teleprompter is biting me again. All right. Hopefully you can see an OpenShift.
Yep.
Yes. Cool. All right. Well, good. That's cool. All right. So yeah. So hopefully for those on the call, if you've never seen OpenShift before, the OpenShift console, this is the OpenShift console. For those that are OpenShift admins, hopefully you're familiar with this. Depending on what version you're on, it hasn't really changed a ton. In the last, and really once you're on the 4.x, and unless, correct me if I'm wrong there, Jonny and Sully, it's the UIs mostly stay the same, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. You'll probably want to make that larger. It's
okay. Let's see. Do a little.
Yeah, that's good.
And then let's view full screen. See if that lets me do it. There we go. Cool. Awesome. All right. So yeah, so this is OpenShift. Wanted to show you, I guess, high level, how does Kasten fit in the picture? A couple different ways. So number one, we are in the operator hub. So really easy for those that are kicking the tires, as Sully and Jonny had mentioned earlier. If you're getting started with OpenShift and have a free OpenShift license, maybe you also want to try Kasten on your new OpenShift cluster. And it's as easy as going to the operator hub and typing in Kasten. And you'll see 3 offerings here. You can see I've got the free version installed. Worth noting that all 3 of these versions have the same capabilities. So we don't limit functionality even in our free version. We do limit the number of worker nodes you can run on. So we let you run up to 5 nodes free. After 5 nodes, that's when you'll need to start licensing. And similar to the developer edition of OpenShift, the free version is kind of self-support. But there is a community on, I think, veeam.com or community.veeam.com that can help you out as well there. but really easy to install. Here you can say purchase. Obviously, it's free, so there's nothing to really purchase. Our latest release, 7.5, we just dropped. Actually, just filmed a webinar yesterday. So if anyone really wants to get in the weeds, yeah, check out the webinar section on veeam.com. That should be published pretty soon. I added some new capabilities there, one of which we'll be showing here in a second. But really easy. You essentially install the operator. I've already done it here, and you'll end up with our operator on here. And you can deploy what's called K10. That is the operand, I think is part of the operator. And the operand that's how we can define what kind of authentication we're using, or our route and any other kind of capabilities there. Worth mentioning though, while you can do this via the operator, if you are more of a Helm person, we can absolutely, I don't know if that's a thing, a Helm person, but you can absolutely use Helm as well to deploy to OpenShift. You don't need to use the operator hub, and it's effectively the same thing. You can see, I can actually adjust the YAML of my operand here, and this is where I can specify things like, here's what I'm using for authentication and whatnot, but you can do that via Helm as well. So once installed, it's great. Okay, we've installed it. We've got Kasten deployed. The first thing you'll notice, and this is brand new for 7.5, we have our Veeam Kasten dynamic console plugin directly in the OpenShift console. So if you're a platform engineer, or if you're coming from maybe a vSphere world or some other traditional virtualization world, it's nice to have at the very least a single, I hate to say this, single pane of glass, but it's, every time I hear that, it makes me shudder. But in this case, we're trying to prevent administrators from having to jump between interfaces. And this is kind of step one. We're obviously going to we're planning on introducing some improvements in the product as time goes on, but at least I can go check, are my backups succeeding? Yes, I've got 2 policies defined. Right now I have 65 unmanaged. We'll talk about that in a second, why there's 65, but the good news is there's 0 that are non-compliant, which is pretty handy. I can also see a quick view of my storage consumption here. So you can see my actual local cluster snapshots is 130 gigs. Really good testament in terms of our dedupe and compression capabilities built into Kasten. I'm only using 93 megs of actual storage in my off cluster, my object storage here. So pretty handy there. And then see if I can remember the key combo to switch tabs. You guys know what it is in Chrome.
What is? I'm sorry. What are you looking for?
It's fine. Oh, here we go. Never mind. I don't even need to do that. So I was trying to figure out how to switch tabs. So in terms of logging in or authentication, we can use things like OAuth, which in this case we are doing. So really nice there. If I hadn't been on this for so long, it would have just pushed me right through. But again, really good for that common authentication mechanism. And obviously with OAuth, you could then plummet to something like Okta or any OIDC provider. So we have a common kind of authentication mechanism there. And then here's our nice friendly dashboard, right? So we can see number of applications we have. We've got 2 policies and our data usage. Again, the good news is this matches what's in the dynamic console plugin. I'd be worried if it didn't. And we've got all our applications. The nice thing about Kasten is it, as you saw, is deployed on the cluster. So we can see all of the namespaces or projects next to us. So as they're dynamically provisioned, let's say you've got a dynamic environment where developers are creating namespaces and deleting namespaces. As soon as they appear, Kasten is aware of them. And you can do some cool things with GitOps where you actually apply backup policies out of the box, right? Or maybe apply a label and say, hey, if a new namespace is created, go ahead and append this label, and that will automatically allow Kasten to start protecting that data. It's really good for platform engineers when you're dealing with your developers who may not give a flip about backup until it matters. This can be really helpful. Worth noting too, I haven't done it here. The reason I have 65 unmanaged apps, these are all kind of the inbuilt OpenShift projects. There is a way to exclude this. I was just lazy and haven't done it yet, but I can essentially hide all these OpenShift things. And you can see I've got my 2 true blue apps here, business critical. So we've got, of course, WordPress, always business critical. My blog on there is very important. And then also Pac-Man. And just to show you that I'm not lying, let's go to our...
Yes, we need 5 nines on Pac-Man.
Yes. Let's go to Pac-Man first, actually. It is fun to. And this is probably going to have an old. Yeah. So sorry. Well, AWS is a good partner. I was at reInvent last week, so I was using this demo environment. We've got my high scores here. This is publicly accessible, so if you guys can figure out my URL, you can play some Pac-Man. flash it up there real quick for you. But essentially, yeah, I can play Pac-Man. I can save my scores. The important thing here is, let me get eaten. I want to make sure that I save that database, right? So that's what I'm trying to protect. That's my business critical application. There we go. I got eaten. Get eaten again. I'm awful at Pac-Man. Look at that. There we go. There we go. So now I've got my high score in there, 390. So let's go back here. I also want to take a look at, oops, that's not where I wanted to go. My WordPress, again, business critical. I want my 5 nines on this as well. Very important that I don't have a cert on it. There we go. I've got my very important blog here that was actually written by AI. It's actually kind of well written. I'll have to say it's, so Sully, I used to work in technical marketing engineering, and yeah, let's just say that I would, it's a little, AI is limited in what it can do, but sometimes it does things very well. And it's, on the one hand, saves us time. On the other, I see some of the fear for sure. But anyways, yes. So here's my blog, and I want to make sure I protect this too, right? So if I go over here, you can see I've got my 2 applications. They already have policies in place. Kasten uses essentially policy definitions to protect workloads. Just to show you what it looks like, here's my Pac-Man one. And as you'd expect, we have kind of all of those configurable options when it comes to backup frequency. We can actually do specific backup windows. So maybe I specify a window that's off hours. If the backup job doesn't finish for whatever reason, we essentially stop the backup job, and that way, production isn't potentially bogged down while the backup's being performed. We can do up to every 5 minutes if I really wanted to. The key here, though, is obviously if it's a huge workload, you have to make sure that it can actually be exported in that time. Otherwise, your RPO may not actually be 5 minutes, but it is there. Typically, we recommend, like, if you're going to minimize that RPO, a 15-minute frequency, just because that will ensure, again, depending on the workload, that we can actually perform the backup, get it off the cluster, and then give you a thumbs up. I will do on the hour, though. Snapshot retention, very important here. Don't want to eat up a ton of storage locally or even remotely. And then I can enable exports, right? So actually, this is a good point. I wasn't actually backing up Pac-Man. I was just taking snapshots. So let's make sure we are backing up Pac-Man. We work with essentially any object storage and NFS, right? So in this case, I'm using S3 compatible storage, which could be, was it multi-cloud object gateway in ODF? I think is the name. I could use MinIO. I could use S3 as well. That's standard AWS S3. That's fully supported. We also support Azure as well, Azure Blob. And with 7.5, we support Google Cloud Storage with immutability. So all of these have the option to enable immutability on this, and Kasten fully supports that. So essentially, out of the gate, you can ensure that you've got, we'll say, ransomware protection by leveraging that immutability of your storage. In terms of focusing on applications, again, being a cloud native application ourselves in Kubernetes, we treat namespaces as applications. So if you were trying to protect VMs today, right now you would essentially target the namespace or project that the VMs are in. You can actually filter and or protect via labels. So for my GitOps friends out there, you can essentially apply a label, and once that label's there, Kasten will automatically start protecting that. You can also select none, and then essentially do cluster scoped resources. So within OpenShift, within Kubernetes, we have these things called cluster scoped resources, things like, role bindings and cluster role bindings, and config maps are namespaced. But there's plenty of examples of things that are cluster wide that aren't necessary. So I can capture that. So think of that as, this is kind of like what you're doing with etcd backup for the cluster scope resources, but you're not actually doing an etcd backup. We're intelligently just grabbing all of the cluster scope resources. So here I'll do it by name. We'll do Pac-Man. And here I can say all resources, but I can also filter resources. So maybe I'm only concerned with the disk for whatever reason. I can actually add a filter and only look at the resource that's, a persistent volume claim. And that'll ensure only that's selected. Again, kind of useful here if I've got, let's say I've deployed all my VMs, all 1,000 VMs into one project. Probably not the best, most scalable approach, but there's ways to work around in terms of protecting with maybe different SLAs for those VMs, even if they're in the same namespace. And then, of course, we can run pre and post hook actions. So if we want to do something like maybe if we're on Mongo, we can do an FS lock or FS unlock afterwards. We can actually export data. So maybe we do like in Postgres, we do a PG dump. We can export that to S3 as well. So essentially, this is what I was talking about earlier, is we get everything kind of all in one go. So we can get the database, the data, underlying the database, and maybe all the metadata for it as well. So when we go to restore, it's all there. We're not having to go to a bunch of different systems and try to bring this back. So I'll go ahead and say edit policy. Hopefully I filled everything out. I did not. I don't want advanced frequency exports. Let's see. We want to keep 4 of those. There we go. All right. Now we're good. Now we're backing up Pacman. I think I was already doing WordPress. Yes, I was exporting WordPress as well. So that similarly have defined something here. And again, this could be a different, I could target multiple namespaces with the same policy. In this case, it's a one-to-one mapping. Worth mentioning as well, we talked about transforms and transform sets. We've got some nice examples built in. So for the individual asking about going from something like RO to ROSA, we actually have an example specifically. This is what you probably need because your storage is going to be changing. I can actually see the YAML here, and this you can see this is a kind of fancy way to do. Hate to say it, but kind of like regex or a find and replace. A good way to do that, so you ensure that those workloads come up.
I mean, regex is already a black magic, so
yes, yeah. The worst too is like I've definitely gotten caught off between like, is it the Perl regex or the JavaScript regex? Because there's like slight differences.
Yeah, the nuance.
Yeah.
Every time I have to deal with regex, I always think of there's a phrase about how like if you write code that is at like the limit of your skills, like debugging is twice as hard as coding. So if you write code that's at the limit of your skills, it's impossible for you to debug it. Like that's basically every regex that I've ever written.
For sure. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time on that. There's the online like regex, testers, whatever.
Yes.
And it became very apparent to me in college that I did not have a great approach in that my approach generally was throw the spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks. Generally that's frowned upon in computer science. They like you to come with an algorithm and to know what you're doing ahead of time. So that was a good hard lesson for me. I've gotten better. I won't say that I don't sometimes just throw the spaghetti against the wall and hope it sticks, but
yeah. There's a deep appreciation here for laziness. So.
Yeah, for sure. So really good there for the transform set. Blueprints, that's the other thing worth noting. So this is blueprints. It's not a lot to show here, but this is how we can actually talk in the native language of the application we're backing up, right? So if you're backing up Postgres, this is where we can do backup actions, right? We can define like a pre-backup action, a backup action, and then a post-backup action. And by adding blueprints, we can essentially tailor our backup and make sure we protect what we want in our application. There's plenty of good examples of this. You don't just have to go to a blank screen. Actually, Kasten donated a project called Kanister to the CNCF. Definitely check it out, kanister.io. It's on GitHub as well. There's a ton of examples in there. So like I said, Postgres, MS SQL, I think there's Elasticsearch, a ton of stuff out there that hopefully it'll help you get started there with those blueprints. And then roles, we're noting too, very granular RBAC here. So again, we focus on enterprise, so we make sure we have these things like very granular control, right? So we've got these canned user roles. You can create new user roles. The beautiful thing about this is under the covers, it is using standard role bindings and cluster role bindings. So you could create these via kubectl and they will appear in Kasten or grant permissions that way. And I've actually missed out too. I wanted to show you everything that I do. I can generate the equivalent YAML. So really, really useful for GitOps. Definitely check out, and I know, Jonny, you'd mentioned it, my colleague Matt Bader's session, it wasn't recorded. He's probably going to do a webinar here soon. He did a session at OpenShift Commons ahead of KubeCon, specifically on validated patterns. And this is, in a way, kind of how he built some of the validated pattern, right? So he would generate something via the UI, see what he could take, and then variabilize, and then punch into the validated pattern. So really useful there. I think, what else did I want to show? A couple other things just kind of worth mentioning for anybody that's in government or federal customers. We are FIPS 140-3 compliant on Red Hat and only on Red Hat OpenShift. There we go. So I have one that's non-compliant because I have not performed a backup with an export. Let's go ahead and fix that.
I'm assuming that requires that the OpenShift cluster itself also have FIPS turned on.
Exactly. Yes. Because yes, FIPS is the whole stack. So we don't, I guess when we say we're FIPS compliant, that means we don't break FIPS if you have a FIPS cluster. Let me go ahead.
So there is a question from Nitin here. Is Veeam backup tool integration for OpenShift virtual machine backups? I think this is probably referring to not traditional Veeam, not Kasten, if I had to guess.
Okay. Yes. So So VBR or Veeam Data Platform, essentially, it is a different product. There is some integration and growing integration between the two products. Today, if you are running VBR, we do have a Kasten plugin, so you'll be able to see things like backup job status. You'll be able to see, success, failure, and what's protected. But you won't actually be able to create backup jobs in VBR today. Furthermore, today there's ways to do it, but Kasten generally can't use VBR today as a repository. So if you've got a backup repository that's deployed on VBR, you can do things like present NFS from that server. Obviously, we can export to NFS. The reason I say the other way you can do that is if you're running vSphere, which why would you be doing that if you're doing OpenShift Virt? But maybe you're not doing OpenShift Virt, you're just doing OpenShift. If you're using the vSphere CSI driver, then we can back up to VBR. And that's just how it has to do with how VBR talks to storage and backs up VMs and whatnot. So Nitin, today there is some integration. Definitely stay tuned. There will be more integration soon. I think at the risk of, again, I'm going to get my wrist slapped by some of my peers in product, things like file level restore, right? That's not there today. It's there today. If you do it manually, we're trying to build that into the product, leveraging things that Veeam's already built when it comes to file level restore in VMs. Cool. Let's see. Last thing I should show too here, Kasten DR. Very important here that we actually set up DR for Kasten, right? So if I mentioned Kasten is deployed in the cluster, this probably departs a little bit if you're existing VBR customer or using some other Veeam VBR customer or using some other backup solution. Oftentimes for traditional infrastructure, it's told, we try to have a separate failure domain. Kasten actually kind of flips this on its head and say, we are actually deployed in the cluster. We treat the cluster as ephemeral. So it's very important you set up Kasten DR. Essentially, that's what we use to back up ourselves, which can be really useful for general DR across OpenShift clusters, right? So I can essentially specify, S3 compatible storage here. I can protect it with a passphrase. Let's say I completely lose this OpenShift cluster. Maybe it got accidentally deleted or something like that. What I can do is essentially spin up a new cluster and then install Kasten like I did earlier with the operator or via Helm. And then I can essentially perform my Kasten restore. Once I have that, then I can then see the Kasten restore point catalog and then start restoring all of those workloads that were running on my cluster that was extinguished.
Yeah, I mean, and that honestly, that goes back to like what Sully and I have been talking about for a long time, right? Where it's like it really becomes backing up your application. Just worry about your app. Don't worry about the cluster. If you have to blow away the cluster and rebuild, fine. But like it's I can't remember the way Sully used to say, but it basically there's a divider between like the infrastructure, the cluster, and the application, right? And then yes, you may have to care a little bit about the infrastructure. You might care even less. We want to get you where you care even less about the cluster, but really backing up your application, keeping it in Git, and then that way you can do like a full restore, just like you're saying, right? Hey, I just built a new snow, installed Kasten, restored, and now I can start rolling out everything else. Like that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think I mentioned earlier, worth mentioning, I think we say we're the number one Kubernetes backup solution, and we're I think 5 years in the running now in GigaOM. But the kind of at the risk of semantics, we don't provide Kubernetes backup per se. We provide backup for Kubernetes applications.
Yeah. So,
and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, right? So again, we want to treat OpenShift or the cluster as ephemeral, and we want to protect at the end of the day the applications and their data.
Yeah, it's really dogfooding the pets versus cattle thing, right? It's ultimately getting there. We have a real quick question from Tiger. Does Kasten back up objects stored in ODF like the object bucket claim, so the S3 buckets?
Gotcha. Good question. I think so. You guys help me out here with ODF. If you've deployed the multi-cloud object gateway, is that deployed like via containers on the cluster and with PVCs, or do you know?
It is deployed. Are you talking about like the buckets themselves? Are they?
Yeah,
deployed as
like are the
containers?
buckets objects in Kubernetes?
They are. They're object bucket claims. Yeah.
Okay.
And then it'll create an object bucket, and then
Okay, but they're resource. I guess they're backed by PVCs, like under the covers on the cluster.
I don't know if it's a PVC. I would have to look. I'm not 100% on that part, but it's
Okay.
definitely an object bucket claim is the API resource, and then that creates the object bucket in ODF. But I'm not sure if that gets mapped down to a PVC or not.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's an asterisk here, but so if it under the covers is using a PVC, then yes, then we can protect it. If it is not, if you want to protect like a traditional S3 object storage, Veeam data platform would be better for that. That can protect S3 and S3 compatible storage. I'd have to go and look and see. I can follow up on that. Cool. I think that's mostly everything I wanted to show. I guess any other questions? Can run through anything look interesting. I can see some nice reporting here. You can see my 11.3%. So all this dedupe is built into Kasten. All the data, worth mentioning too, all the data that we send off the cluster is encrypted. We can't turn encryption off. The good news about that means an attacker can't turn encryption off. So really important there in terms of that kind of ransomware protection.
You'd made a point earlier. I can't remember if it was about OADP or not. Maybe not OADP, or maybe it was Valera. I can't remember. But like in traditional tooling, like you're using a shared token, right? And then so you have like the auth token, and that can be reused for everything. So if that were to be compromised, then you're compromised, right? Your backups and restores, all that. Like there's a ripple effect of that. And then did you talk about that where Kasten it creates the custom token? Okay, maybe you did not just miss it.
I did not talk about it. So yeah, so I know with 7.5 we just released support for Azure Federated Identity, which does exactly that.
Okay.
You don't have to use long-lived tokens. I know for S3 we support that. If I go create a new profile, I'll say S3 test. I can use AWS IAM. As opposed to having to use long-lived token.
Oh, that's cool.
So yes, very important there. I again talk about my mistakes. I've definitely committed an access key and secret key maybe once to GitHub. So once that horse is out of the barn, it sure is hard to get back in, huh?
Yeah,
I think Johnny and I both have exposed our poll secrets here on the stream before, and
I was
the process of getting new ones. Yeah.
To be fair, those are long strings. I mean, you'd have to be really committed. I guess you can pause it and try to try to grab
if you wanted the greatest pull secret of all time, it would be worth it. But I had to, as soon as I realized what I did, I was like, oh my God, no. And it's not trivial to get replaced.
Good to know. All right, I will definitely try to guard mine. But yeah, I guess the last thing, I keep on saying last thing, but multi-cluster support, obviously with something like ACM on the OpenShift side, Kasten kind of essentially can mirror that. We support multi-cluster. So you essentially can have a multi-cluster dashboard. You can see the status across clusters. It's really good there. I hate to say fleet management, but if you have a ton of different Kubernetes distributions or a ton of different OpenShift real estate, you can essentially manage all those clusters from one interface.
That'd be a cool demo. Like having like ACM set up with like 3 or 4 clusters, and then having Kasten set up, and then kind of seeing what that looks like, and then especially seeing all of the telemetry stuff kind of bubbling up, and then having the different interfaces to kind of see. That'd be a solid demo.
Yes, and I think we have what we need, at least for the beginning, based on Bader's validated pattern, where I think he's deploying ACM in there, and if he's not, probably can hook that in.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely something that we maybe for another Ask an OpenShift admin.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Cool guys. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and stop sharing unless there's anything else you want to dive into.
I don't see any questions coming in. I think we tackled everything.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been very thorough. Thank you.
Yeah.
No worries. Thank you guys. I appreciate the time, and I think I've also taken more time than I was allocated, so I apologize for that.
No, we have no set allocations.
Okay.
It's funny because sometimes people say, oh, streams are too long, and sometimes people say, oh, streams are too short, and stuff like that. Speaking of which, from an audience perspective, if y'all have any thoughts or suggestions on how we can improve discoverability, we'd love to hear them, because like, we've worked with our marketing counterparts. Jonny puts in, a ton of work into putting in timestamps and stuff like that. But, we get that it's hard to find, the specific 90 seconds that answer your question in, an hour and a half long stream or something like that. So I don't know. I don't know how to solve that easily, because a lot of folks will watch the streams, or I'm using air quotes, because they're not actually watching. They listen to them as though they're a podcast and stuff like that. And it's certainly valuable in that regards. But we're always looking for ways to help improve the discoverability and make the content more usable to folks. So
Yeah.
Discoverability, Waleed, is like, how do I find the information that I want within all of this? All of this noise, right? Because it's like, everybody knows, like, the first 5 minutes is me and Jonny kind of chit chatting and bantering back and forth, about whatever random thing happens to be, on our mind at the moment. And, it's, and I go through this myself, right? I've been doing, what episode are we on? 140 something, right?
144.
There's times when it'll come up and like somebody in Slack is asking a question like, oh, we covered this on the stream. And then I want to find, one, well, which stream was it? And two, where in that stream did it happen? And, I've been on not all of the streams, but I've been on probably, 90% of the streams, and I can't remember these things, for sure.
It's at the risk of plugging in other podcasts, but one of my favorite podcasts is Stuff You Should Know, and really good podcast for those that are just curious. It used to be How Stuff Works. I think it's iHeartRadio, but there's a certain affinity. I think both presenters or hosts are from Atlanta area, but they've been doing it for like 12 years or something like that, and they often forget what topics they've done because every show is a different topic.
Yeah.
And to your point, from a discoverability standpoint, like it's kind of a Control F in the browser and then go through. So it definitely is a problem as the catalog grows.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those areas where, like, can AI create a transcript and then use that transcript to write a blog post and explore the deep dark art of search engine optimization, which is
It is magic. Yeah. A little bit of fairy dust in there. I'm going to plug too. There's a blog that was presented at KubeCon by a number of our engineers, specifically protecting vector databases is really important for those AI workloads. So Kasten can help protect that. Sorry, that's the marketing. There's the marketing.
Do you know what the blog is? I'll post it.
I can grab, if you just search KubeCon and then vector database data protection, I think that'll probably come up. Let's see if I can race you.
All right. Well, while y'all are searching for that, we'll land the plane, or start the landing process, I should say. So, as always, for any questions that you have, feel free to submit those in chat. We'll answer them as much as we can here on the stream while we're still going. If you get something in after we end, or we can't answer it here, we'll be sure to follow up in one of the streams that's coming up. You're also welcome to reach out to Jonny and or I with any questions that you happen to have. So again, if you're not watching us live, we know a ton of folks don't watch us live. Don't hesitate to reach out. That's why we put our email addresses here on the screen. If you can't see us, you can find us at jonny@redhat.com, JONNY, or Sully, SULLY, at redhat.com. And we love to hear from y'all. We greatly appreciate when folks reach out. Waleed, I see you in chat. I know I got an email from you, and I didn't actually. It occurred to me that I forwarded it over to Jonny, and there was like a whole conversation happening, and I don't think I ever responded to you on that whole thing. So my apologies for not responding to you before the stream started. But
we responded directly third person.
Yeah, I've been so heads down in getting ready for Red Hat 1, and I've been doing like nonstop document reviews over the last 2 weeks. Like my brain is just mush with subscription guide reviews and lab guide reviews and slide reviews for sessions and getting implementation guide reviews done and all this other stuff. And I forget what sometimes these things. So but we appreciate hearing from y'all, and we do generally greatly rather enjoy it. So with that being said, did y'all find the link?
Yep, I shared it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. See, there you go. I'm not even keeping up with our own chat here.
It's all right. We got you, Sully. We got you back.
Yeah, I got nothing. With that being said, while I figure out which buttons I'm clicking, the correct ones this time, the correct outro as opposed to the incorrect intro, I do want to say, before we go, thank you very much to our audience today. Really enjoyed all the chat. Loved all the questions from y'all. Thank you so much. Matt, it's been a pleasure having you on. This one was great. Like I said, I haven't seen Kasten in a few years, and it is dramatically different. And I always say I love learning things on these streams because, again, I'm a manager now, and I've been a manager for 3 years, which means that I don't know a lot anymore. So it's been a pleasure.
Screaming. I think I've been a manager twice, and I think both I've stepped back 3 times now, and I just like the technology. It's fun to play. Yeah. So I feel like a Sully. I guess that's my
So with that, Jonny, I will hand over to you for last words.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, thank you very much, man, for coming on. Really appreciate it. And thanks for putting up with my airheadedness this week. I am normally not this disorganized. I mean, I'm disorganized, but I'm not normally this disorganized. So I'm usually pretty good about posting things. So my bad for that. I'm glad we got it all worked out right away. But no, thank you for the willingness to come on, and like your team, you and Matt Bader, y'all have been awesome to work with, man. So like I really do appreciate the the feedback going back and forth between Red Hat and Veeam and us and our teams and stuff like that. So it's been really cool. And then Peter and Michael, really, again, thank you very much for kind of making the connections for us so we could do this. And Matt, you're always welcome back. So if you have something else you want to come on and talk about, like, just let me know and we'll get you on the books.
For sure. Yeah, definitely have some interesting things in the pipe. So we'd love to show you guys. And then, I'll just echo thank you for having me on. And I'll echo thank you, Peter, and thank you, Michael, for the collaboration. So we love working with Red Hat. And I'll see you guys at Red Hat 1, Sully.
Always one of us.
I'll be there.
Okay. All right.
I'll be there. It'll be 48 glorious hours in Las Vegas. And I think I'm presenting for about 20 of those. So,
all right, better you than me.
Yeah. All right, Jill. We will see everybody next week.
Yep. See you.
Thanks, guys.